Okay, let's move on to the next region, the bottom left region of the bracket. This was the East region, and the main storyline I had going into this region was the fact that unlike Gonzaga's region and unlike some of the other regions around the bracket, I thought this one could be the most wide open one. And let me explain why. Michigan, a number one seed, the team that won the Big Ten regular season title and the team that had a very good regular season. They were the one seed here, but a big worry for Michigan was that they lost Isaiah Livers, their second leading scorer, a senior, and a guy that has been through the battles. He's been through the wars, and he was out for the first two games of this tournament. He's probably going to be out for the Sweet 16 as well. I feel like if he does come back, the earliest it would be in the Final Four. So we'll check on that later. But at the same time, I thought that with that injury to Michigan, and keep in mind, if Michigan was 100% healthy, I actually do believe that they had a really good shot to win a national championship. That was my one thing for me coming into this bracket that I was looking at. Michigan, the number one seed, they have an injury. Maybe they're vulnerable. Alabama, the number two seed, the Tide win the SEC regular season and SEC tournament championship. You have Texas in there who won the Big 12 tournament. We'll get to that disaster in a little bit. You also have Florida State and Leonard Hamilton, a coach who has been trying his best and has been knocking on the door of making it to the Final Four. So I was very curious to see how does this region open up and what should we expect. And we're going to go over every game now. There were a couple of play-in games in this bracket as well. Texas Southern, the 16 seed, gets the win over Mount St. Mary's. Good job by Johnny Jones, the former head coach of LSU, former college coach of Ben Simmons. He also was under Coach Eric Musselman's staff at Nevada when they made the Sweet 16 a couple years ago. So I'm happy for Johnny Jones. I'm happy for Michael Weathers, the Oklahoma State transfer, who is Texas Southern's best player, really. They ended up getting the job done. My guy Zhuang He on Mount St. Mary's, he played well. Unfortunately, though, Texas Southern from the SWAC ends up getting the dub. And then the other 11 seed playing game, how about this one? UCLA and Michigan State. And this was a game that I was very curious to see what happened because UCLA was a team that, as you would expect, they were kind of decreasing towards the bubble because Chris Smith, their best player, he got hurt in January, and the Bruins, the fact that there wasn't a normal non-conference slate and the Bruins didn't really have the opportunity to play anyone of significance besides Marquette, their resume wasn't really great. And UCLA actually did not end the season very well at all. And that's the other main storyline heading into this region that I'll get into a little bit later, is the Pac-12. How good of a performance that conference had. My guy Bill Walton, he picked all 5 Pac-12 teams to make the Final Four. That tells you everything you need to know about my guy Bill Walton and how he could just see the future a little bit better than us. But at the same time, UCLA, they were down for a majority of that game against Michigan State, and somehow, some way, they find a way to win. And look, a couple things. One, I know everyone is going to be talking about what happened between Tom Izzo and Aaron Henry. We all know that Tom Izzo has a little bit of a history of yelling at players. And by the way, it wasn't Aaron Henry. It was Tom Izzo and Gabe Brown. At the half, Gabe Brown was screaming at Tom Izzo. Tom Izzo was not having any of it. He grabs his shirt. And I just wanted to say, first of all, if you're Gabe Brown, you're Gabe Brown. What are you doing yelling at Tom Izzo when it comes to basketball? I'm just going to assume that he knows more than you, considering what he has accomplished and what you have accomplished. But at the same time, Tom Izzo didn't mean anything by that. Crazy things happen in the huddle. You remember in the AFC Championship game, or was it the AFC Divisional round, Tyreek Hill on the Chiefs, he ended up pushing an assistant coach, and they were fine after that. It didn't turn into anything. I think it was the same thing there. But unfortunately for Michigan State, and this was really the start of the downfall of the Big Ten in this tournament, was they had a lead, and they blew it. And I'll give Mick Cronin and UCLA credit. We're going to get to their remarkable run into the Sweet 16 a little bit later in this segment. But at the same time, Michigan State blew that game. And Michigan State was a team that, keep in mind, they finished 9-11 in the Big Ten. The only reason why they got into March Madness was because we all assumed that the Big Ten was the best conference in college basketball. And unfortunately for them, it didn't turn out that way, and Michigan State's start in this tournament was an exact result of the sequences to come, and that's a disappointing loss for Michigan State. The game ended up going to overtime. UCLA holds on. Jaime Jaquez and Johnny Juzang were phenomenal in this one, especially Jaquez. I mean, man, UCLA definitely would not have won that game without him. So good job by Mick Cronin picking up his first NCAA tournament win as the head coach of the UCLA Bruins over Michigan State. That final was 86-80. Now, let's get into all of the first round games. We'll start off Michigan. They end up getting the win over Texas Southern in the 116 game, 82-66. And I'll start off by saying this. This game was a little bit closer for comfort than you wanted if you were a fan of Michigan. But at the same time, from a long-term perspective, I don't think it necessarily hurt them because keep in mind, this is a Michigan team that lost Isaiah Livers, their second leading scorer. And the problem with that is sometimes, especially this late in the season, it's very difficult to just adjust to that and get used to playing a new lineup, playing in a new starting five without one of your better players. And in this game against Texas Southern, I think two guys in particular, Eli Brooks and Brandon Johns, who we saw later on in the LSU game, really saved Michigan's bacon as well, along with Chaundee Brown. But those guys are starting to step up since Isaiah Livers went down for Michigan. And if you are a fan of the Wolverines, that is a great, great sign. Excuse me. But Michigan ends up getting the win 82-66 over Texas Southern. And that's a really good job. Juwan Howard wins his first game in the NCAA tournament as the head coach of Michigan. How about the 8-9 game? LSU out of the SEC, they end up beating St Bonaventure 76-61, and there were actually a lot of people that picked St Bonaventure to win this game. I was not one of them. I thought that St Bonaventure was actually capable of making a run if they got a little bit of a better draw in this 8-9 game, and it's funny because both of these teams could not score in the slightest early on in this game, and for me going into this one, I was very curious to see how exactly this game would look when you compare the contrasting styles of these two teams. We know that LSU is super dynamic. They're super athletic. The only problem is they don't play any defense. And St. Bonaventure is really the opposite of that. They're a very fundamentally sound team. They're a group of older seniors. Mark Schmidt is a very good coach. And I was curious to see how that contrast of styles would play out. And LSU, there was never really a doubt. Cam Thomas and Trendon Watford both played very well in this game. The Tigers ended up winning by 15, and it was just a bad matchup for St. Bonaventure. I'll be curious to see if Coach Schmidt is still there next year. I think he should. I was kind of surprised he didn't end up getting the Boston College job. So we'll see what ends up happening with Coach Schmidt at St. Bonaventure. He's an underrated coach. He's had a really nice run there. Georgetown and Colorado. This was the 12-5 game, and I'll admit, I fell into the trap. I actually incorrectly picked Georgetown to win this game, and keep in mind, Georgetown all of a sudden just started playing out of their minds at Madison Square Garden in the Big East tournament. And what made that run so crazy was that there wasn't really any warning signs leading up to that week in New York City to expect that Georgetown was going to be doing that. And somehow, some way, even though Patrick Ewing didn't have much success his first couple years as the head coach of Georgetown, the Hoyas end up winning the Big East tournament. And the thing is that with Georgetown, like, they weren't having a good regular season. If they lose in the first round of the Big East tournament to Marquette like everyone expected them to, I think Hoya fans may started to call for Pat Ewing's job. Matt McClung and James Akinjo, Josh LeBlanc, all those guys left, but he saved his job, obviously. I don't know if he would have gotten fired, but he definitely bought himself some more time. Georgetown wins the Big East tournament, but in this game against Colorado, they looked like the same team before their COVID pause, and Colorado just looked more experienced, and they could not miss. My guy, Jambari Walker, the son of former NBA player Samaki Walker, he balled out in this game, hitting 4 threes in the first half alone. McKinley Wright was phenomenal. Colorado's bigs outplayed Georgetown's bigs, and Colorado blew out Georgetown, putting up 96 points. They win at 96-73. Good job by Tad Boyle and the boys getting their first tournament win. And then also in this region, Florida State ends up getting the win over UNC Greensboro in the 4-13 game, 64-54. And Florida State has been a team that over the last couple of years, they've really been knocking on the door. And they've had some tough draws. They lost in the Elite Eight against Michigan a couple years ago. They lost to Gonzaga and Rui Hachimura and that team in the Sweet 16 a couple of years ago. And Florida State and Leonard Hamilton, last year, they won the ACC, and they were another team that I was absolutely looking at. Okay, they could possibly make the Final Four, but at the same time, even though they lost Trent Forrest, even though they lost 2 lottery picks in Patrick Williams and Devin Vassell, Leonard Hamilton, again, had a really nice season, and the crazy thing about this Florida State team is that not only do they win games, but different players step up at different times, and it's unfortunate because UNC Greensboro was another team that I thought if they literally would have gotten anyone besides Florida State, I would have given them a legitimate shot to win. But we saw that matchup a couple of years ago in a very similar way when the Florida State Seminoles took on Vermont in the NCAA tournament, and you could just tell very early on, even though that Vermont team was very good and Anthony Lamb was a very good player, we were able to tell early on that Florida State's athletic ability and their length and height was just going to be a little bit too much for a mid-major like the Catamounts. And it's unfortunate because UNC Greensboro, they have a pro on their team. Isaiah Miller is a kid that is going to play in the NBA. I believe that. And UNC Greensboro had a great year. I think Wes Miller is a coach that isn't going to be there for that much longer. I think NC State, the next time that opens, he could definitely be a candidate for that. If Wake Forest ever opens anytime soon, I know they just hired Coach Forbes. He could definitely be a guy. But Florida State ended up getting the win by 10 without making a 3. Super impressive. They could win in many different ways. How about UCLA? They end up upsetting BYU by a final score of 73-62. And look, BYU was a team that I was very curious to see what exactly their seeding was going to be heading into this March Madness tournament due to the fact that, yes, I understand they play in the WCC, which, yeah, it has Gonzaga, but besides that, especially in a year where St. Mary's was down, they didn't necessarily have that much competition for an at-large bid in the WCC. And BYU, they actually looked good in the WCC championship game against Gonzaga. However, I actually think that UCLA and their length that they exposed BYU with, I think that could have been the difference maker. We saw that happen in many games where a lot of people expected a mid-major to beat the high major. And I'll tell you what I mean. I know BYU and St Bonaventure and San Diego State, right? Those teams aren't true mid-majors. But they're not Power 6 teams, and I think one of the reasons why all 3 of those squads actually lost were just an overwhelming of length and athleticism by the other team, and just things that they had not seen in a while in terms of length and in terms of just pure depth. And I think UCLA, that was really one of the main reasons why they were able to get the job done. They were just out executing BYU. They were frustrating them throughout the game, and I was really impressed with the game plan that head coach of the Bruins, Mick Cronin, was able to use. And once again, I cannot say enough about my guy, Johnny Juzang. The transfer from Kentucky is an absolute baller, and he was phenomenal for the UCLA Bruins in this game against BYU. He finishes up with 27 points, 5 rebounds, and a block. And it's unfortunate for BYU because I do think Mark Pope, is one of the better young coaches in all of college basketball, and he could be another guy who has a big job possibly coming his way soon. And UCLA was just able to out-execute. Good job by the Bruins and Mick Cronin once again. People say Mick Cronin, he wasn't a great hire at UCLA. I'm not sure if he was able to fit. I'll get into that a little bit when we discuss UCLA's next game in the round of 32. But we got to get to this one. Number 3 seeded Texas, a team that heading into the season, even though they had all the talent in the world, I told you guys, I can't trust Shaka Smart with talent because he's always had teams with talent and he's never been able to get the job done. And what ended up happening? Texas actually had a very good regular season. They were much better than anyone could have expected. It was the first time in a while where we were out here watching Texas Longhorns games, and we were like, wow, this team's athleticism and their length and their roster is actually coming to fruition. This team is finally starting to play just like we know they can. And Shaka Smart, he was a coach that really changed his recruiting philosophy when he came over to Austin, Texas. He went away from the skills and the recruiting technique that got him to be so successful at VCU, and up until this season at Texas, it didn't work. There were a lot of people that said if the season doesn't get canceled last year, Shaka Smart doesn't survive at Texas, and he's not the coach anymore. And Texas has a great regular season, we know that, but somehow, some way, they lose this game to Abilene Christian. And let me run some numbers by you. In this game against Abilene Christian, it's not like Abilene Christian shot the ball absurdly well. These were the final numbers in this game, which makes it, for me, even more astonishing. When you look at Abilene Christian and their numbers as a team, they shot 29% from the field. Texas shoots 45. They shoot 3 of 18 from 3. Texas shoots 7 of 20. That's 35% to 16%, and still they lose. And it's funny because Texas played awful the whole night, and still they somehow, someway found themselves with a lead late in the game. And then, of course, a 59% free throw shooter for Abilene Christian ends up making both. And the Texas Longhorns lose to Abilene Christian. What a disappointing end to the season for Shaka Smart. If I was a Longhorn fan, I wouldn't be happy. That simple. No reason to go home when you have this much talent. I wanted to give a shout out to Mark Turgeon and Maryland. They ended up getting the win 63-54 over UConn. I've said it many times on this show before that this is the best coaching job of Mark Turgeon's career. The fact that he had this Maryland team in the tournament and winning a game when he lost the amount of talent he had last year was super impressive, playing in a Big Ten that at least we all thought was very tough. And they dominated UConn from start to finish. They shut down James Bouknight. Tyrese Martin and RJ Cole weren't really able to do anything either. And even though it's a disappointing end to the season for UConn, I do think they are going in the right direction with Coach Hurley. Alabama beats Iona 68-55. Coach Pitino and the boys were in it as long as they could. I like my guy Ross. He was cooking for Iona, but Alabama, really impressive win, putting up 68 points against Iona, winning by 13. The round of 32. Michigan LSU was a closer game than a lot of people expected it to be. I actually gave the Tigers an outside shot of winning this game, and they came close. They were up in the first half. They had a 5-point lead in the second half. Unfortunately, I think the game changed when a possible N1 was called on LSU. I believe they were down 3 or 4 at the time. They gave it a charge. Michigan ends up taking advantage of it, and it was all downhill from there if you're the Tigers. I picked Michigan to win this game because I just couldn't see Will Wade out-coaching Juwan Howard in a big game. Ultimately, that came to fruition, but Shawnee Brown and Eli Brooks, shout out to those two, because they saved Michigan's bacon, and if it wasn't for them, who knows if the Wolverines are still playing. LSU, defense is optional for them. You knew it was going to bite them eventually. Florida State 71-53 over Colorado to go to the Sweet 16. I'll give you another guy that could be one of the more underrated players in all of college basketball, and that is Anthony Polite of Florida State. He was phenomenal in this game for the Seminoles against Colorado, and he's been a guy that has been shooting the ball well really all season, and not a lot of people are avid Florida State fans that they know who this guy is, but if you do not know the name Anthony Polite, remember it now because he is one of the most hot three-point shooters in all of college basketball. He's very streaky as well, but once again, when he gets going, he is very hard to stop, and when you look at his numbers in this game against Colorado, he played really well. I'm pulling up those numbers right now. Sorry for this poor radio. But yeah, Anthony Polite's a player I really like. 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists in the game against Colorado. I wanted to say once again, congrats to McKinley Wright on a great career, which ended against Florida State the other night. UCLA, they get the win over Abilene Christian, and I'll say this. If you were a Texas fan watching that game, Abilene Christian, UCLA, you should be embarrassed because Abilene Christian against UCLA wasn't able to score the ball. I think the Bruins were able to do a nice job taking advantage of everything that Abilene Christian gave to them, and the Wildcats couldn't score. Unfortunately, the Bruins take advantage of the Sweet 16 draw. And then Alabama blows out Maryland 96-77. The Tide were on fire in this game, couldn't miss. Jaden Shackelford, 21 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. We're going to be previewing the Sweet 16 games, obviously, I said, on Friday's show. And Alabama, they are going to be taking on UCLA. The Tide are a team that I think maybe has an outside shot of winning a national championship. I think they could be that good, and if they play like they did against Maryland, I'm confident they could beat anyone. So Bama, you have UCLA, you have Florida State, and you have Michigan in the Sweet 16 of this East region.